territories that had enjoyed a semblance of peace for 57 years since 1961, but is currently deteriorating rapidly into a full-scale conflict. I will urge the UN and AU to look into Cameroon's case because we cannot impose superficial solutions on the English-speaking half of the country. I will urge France and President Macron to be seen as part of the solution to salvage the situation and restore justice and equity to that part of the country. Mankind has had enough of its bloodshed over natural resources which should rather benefit their lives.
Azam, who's that you go?
Yeah, okay. Calm down yourself. Calm down.
Just calm down, calm down.
When you end up over down petrol station, no man will be there.
Wait. They ask. So they ask you say wait till they do the talk.
Make it clear when you cry, so you keep thinking, keep them. Calm down yourself. We know all the boys the way they stand for the junction. We do with them sooner for us. Calm down yourself. Make it cry, so you keep tension.
So you say as you don't get ID, can you just go home?
Calm down yourself.
No cry, no cry.
When you cry, so you keep tension. Calm down yourself. Make it cry. Calm down yourself. We know other boys for junction. You see, know the mind is.
So he asks you say wait till they ask you say wait till.
About the past, they come here to ignore them. They first and first, normally you more fear.
Normally.
I don't cross now. They say me now, but they are big man. The one way we stand vote, it's going to that soup with be. I don't go meet them now. The other man now. The other one say I'm going to meet up patron. I go meet up patron. Patron gives us some ID card. I tell you this one don't give me ID card. It doesn't say I tell you 70 years. He said the do it as if for now and they do me anything. He said, at the work of Sudan, I don't give me ID card. I say yes. The other one, they don't come on now. He go talk some motor man now. I want to see can come now. The big man say, I follow that man. Go start for play with them. They get ID card. They go start. I try to beg them for the I need that. I beg them for the doesn't man not try for the man not even try. Man not try for the put me a send them for yeah. And the big policeman they did that. The other one jang me na enter that some place where it's a petrol station. So now they put it get ID card of they go stand.
You see people there for the
No man no be there.
So Jack you go down inside do it.
It's me go inside. It doesn't my move my clothes. I don't say I didn't need the beg him. They say this will be mommy picky. I didn't begin Bobby. It's a man no try her life. Yes, I didn't like papa. I beg you need I beg the man today. The man is never done. Taking me. Jing me my instinct me back up to my stand before I move my clothes nicely me for this.
So you move your blood review.
So it happened now so for petrol station for veterinary junction here. The Africa Petroleum.
Yes, now for the Africa Petroleum.
Okay.
Only one petroleum.
Okay.
Don't worry, I said it.
Only yesterday, 3 days ago, I wrote a letter to the chairman of the AU, Dr. Muhammad Musa, and said, please send a fact-finding mission to southern Cameroon. Houses are being burnt. Women are being raped. People are not going to school. Call and convene a meeting of African heads of states of government as an urgent act. But somehow, maybe he's handicapped in some way. They are lethargic. Somehow, they cannot act. Somehow, they are untouched and unmoved. And letters such as ours perhaps are dismissed as the frustrations of inconsequential individuals, which time will render useless. It is sad. But yet we can never not afford the luxury of giving up hope.
On Thursday, the 12th of July 2018, for Ofen Tiben Batibo subdivision, my people they come out from the bushes and forest where they don't hide for the past 1 month. because Thursday it be been a market day, and na the only possibility where they be fit sell a little and buy provision. As they come out from the bushes, they come. Confrontation be between the Amber boys and the police or the army or whatever La Republique. As that confrontation it be day, people they be dey run. As guns, bullets were flying all over, the people were just running all over the place. And then they be go find a shelter for one of the relatives. Their house will be out of the village, for the outskirts. They go find shelter for day. So as they be find shelter for day, they hide. As they hide for day, after that confrontation, the Amber boys they leave. The army they enter now inside the quarters. As they enter inside the quarters, people where they come innocently, a little girl where he leave a young baby of about 2 months, he carry oil for his back, he did come, he don't know what did happen. They just meet with the army, then they just shoot it, he fall. The worker follow people them up and down. As they reach for that house where all the family members they be enter for hide for day. Close family members to me and distant family members. As they reach for that house, they mash the door. They enter there. They be shoot everybody. There was a pregnant woman there carrying a baby. They shot the baby in her hands. They shot the pregnant woman. They shot old men of 75 and above. They shot aged women from 65 and above. They shot just everybody in the house. They shoot some people for their heads, their brains, they spill for ground. There was blood everywhere. Some people were even kneeling down and begging and pleading for their lives. They just shot. They wasted every single life inside that house. And for inside that house, I began. Everybody was related. That is, there were cousins, there were uncles, there were aunts, there were mbanyas, and all that inside that house. Because all those people, they stem from one compound. Their grandmothers are all from one compound. It's one family. All that people, they waste them. So for my house, I get about 23. I get 23 family members where they be run. They can't seek shelter for my house inside that pain. So we use my house now as a venue for mourn. For that, we family members, the way they don't shoot them. And for hide, whether places they go feel cold small, make these people they feel go back, and we don't know when. So now the situation that way we find ourselves for inside, it's so painful, it's so hurtful. We don't know how long this suffering will take, that we were not even able to bury them. Some people, then are two people, they bury them. And they bury some people three for inside one grave. They bury some people 2 inside one grave. There were no people to dig the graves. Because the remaining people, they be alive. All they be don't run. All they be don't run. So for inside my house, I get these few relatives, the way they come. The other ones, they seek shelter for other places. Now so it happened. Vigi, I don't know, I don't understand. The pain is so much. The pain is so much. They killed daddy, mommy, they killed daddy, auntie, and uncle, and auntie. They, in fact, cousins, they just wasted. They just wasted. They just wasted. They just wasted. Una keep pray for we. Una keep pray for we.
That kind of butchery, that kind of, just because of what I said, power, political and monetary financial power in the hands of a few too many wrong people, greedy, selfish people who just want to own the earth's resources. Okay, just because they discovered oil in the Anglophone half, the English-speaking half, the non-French-speaking half, the southern portion, or is it the north, of Cameroon, and they have to get grip on it. They have to have it, irrespective of whose blood has to be shed. It's not, it's not good enough to be shed. It's not good enough. I mean, the world must, what else? Take a look at the atrocities, the savagery.
In Cameroon, this is what Paul Biya's soldiers are doing to people of southern Cameroon.
Jesus. Oh God.
Stand up.
Can you imagine? It's all because they are asking to be separated and be an independent country like they used to be before both countries came together in the 60s to become one. When they came together at the time, they signed an agreement. But now they want to leave because, first of all, the French-speaking part of Cameroon has refused to honor any part of the agreement that was signed. And not only have they marginalized the English speakers of Cameroon, but now they are trying to recolonize the English-speaking part of Cameroon by saying that they must speak French in schools and they must speak French in courts and all arms of government. In fact, the problem started when they were sending them judges that only spoke French. And the French law is different from the English law. And also they were sending them teachers that only spoke French. And then these people decided that enough is enough. We're no longer interested in merging to be one country. And in response, Paul Biya sent soldiers after them. In the past, I showed you where soldiers were burning their houses. I also showed you that a lot of them have fled into the bush. And this is what is destroying us Africans. Why would anybody see a video like this and not say something? They don't even have to be from your area. This is wrong. Biya is 85 years old. The man is 85 and he has refused to step down. Before he became president, he was prime minister for 7 years, and then he's been president for the last 36 years, 42 consecutive years of being the leader of Cameroon. And what has he done? And I keep wondering about these soldiers, like what could be going on in their mind? Forget about language differences. As of right now, they are all Cameroonians. But like I said, we are divided. So it is because we are divided that dictators are able to use us against ourselves. That's why the dictator of Cameroon can use soldiers to torture their own people. I know that some people are speaking up in French-speaking part of Cameroon, but it's not enough. Even if he's not torturing you like he's torturing the English speakers of Cameroon, it's 42 years not enough. Like, seriously, French speakers, you need to wake up. You all need to protest and make this struggle yours as well.
Because of the Cameroon problem, that's why my sister is dying. They want to kill me like this, they want to kill me. And my sister was said I would run away. Now we are in the jungle, we have died in the jungle in Panama. We have not died in the jungle. This is 1 year ago now that we are on this journey. Almost 1 year on this journey, we are not even succeed just because they want to kill all the Cameroon. Just because they want to kill all the Cameroon. Biya wants to finish all of us. Oh, my sister is already gone. Maybe the next person is me. Maybe the next person is me. Why? Why is that the Cameroon? Why? They will let Cameroon. They will let Cameroon tell us something. They will let Cameroon. You come and you want to die and leave me to who? You are leaving me to who? Who are you leaving me to who? Wait. Why? Look, I have friends. Look at them. Look, I have friends. Look, I have friends. Please. Why? Oh, come back up. Shit, why?
I don't understand the kind of heart that you African leaders have to remain so passive in front of such gruesome images. I don't understand the kind of stone that has replaced your hearts and your brains, and the kind of indignity that you feel comfortable in that is allowing you to watch some things like this happening on this continent and you remain quiet about it. If it was American children or European children or Asian children that were killed the same way, you will be the first one to show solidarity and protest such killing and demand that something be done. But every time that African innocent citizens, vulnerable people, women and children are abused, you remain quiet and you pretend that you are not looking. We do understand that you don't care about our lives, but we have the mandate that you require. We have the mandate to require that you respect the lives and you value the lives of innocent children on this continent. We cannot sustain such indifference anymore. Each one of you is responsible for the life, the well-being, the safety, the security of every single African kid on this continent and the diaspora. That is why you joined the African Union. You can be the president of Gabon. You are responsible for a citizen in Togo. You can be the president of Angola. You are responsible for a citizen in Nigeria. That is why you're part of the African Union. You have the duty to protect us. You have the responsibility to defend us. And we will not sit idle and watch you continue to pretend that nothing is happening. Whether it is in Cameroon or Congo or Togo, our people are being killed. And some of you have the power to do something about it, but you choose to remain quiet. You choose to remain quiet when you know your voice carries the power of millions of people. You know you have the power to speak up, to stand up, but you are allowing the whole world to mock this continent by your indifference. It is enough. We are tired of you African leaders collectively destroying the future of this continent. We are tired of you ridiculing us all the time and allowing cynical, selfish, and wicked men like Paul Biya and his friends to continue abusing the poor citizens of this continent.
De la République, très bien à prendre la parole.
A toast of friendship between President Paul Biya and Musa Faki Mahamat, chairperson of the African Union Commission, as his official visit to Cameroon enters day 2. The African Union chairperson is coming to Cameroon at the time when the country is preparing to hold its presidential election. Musa Faki Mahamat has assured President Paul Biya and the Cameroonian population that his institution is going to be dispatching a team of election observers when Cameroonians go to the polls.
Je voudrais vous rassurer du meilleur accompagnement possible.
You are a disgrace to yourselves. You are a disgrace to this continent. You are a disgrace to the black people.
You look at China, you look at the Koreas, and more recently Vietnam and even Cambodia, you see that education is deliberately designed to help them achieve a certain goal. You go to certain Arab countries, that is the same thing. Education is very important. But when you look at quite a number of African countries, we continue to immerse ourselves in the education that was put together by the white colonizers to make the African elite an appendage for white activities. We must liberate ourselves from that kind of education. In the words of Kenya's Ngugi wa Thiong'o, we must have education that decolonizes our minds. And I think that that can be done.
Where are they, men and women of goodwill in this country? Especially the Southern Cameroonians. Where are they? Where are they to rise up and organize themselves and defeat this power of darkness that is looming the air in Southern Cameroon, sucking the blood of our children? Where are you people? Why do you keep silent in the midst of genocide going on your own soil? More than 76 villages burned down. Thousands displaced, many in prisons, many in Nigeria. Your own brothers and sisters are chased from their houses to the bushes, and you keep silent and watch. Some are buried in mass graves.
Some give birth in bushes. I watched the image of the young lady that gave birth in the bush. A bouncing baby boy. What will this child say when he grows up? That my mother gave birth to me in the bush because President Paul Biya and his friends chased them from our house. Is that what a child would say? Is that a good history? Why do you keep silent? Why? Why do you allow selfish, demonic individuals that have sold their sorrows to the devil?
Fortifie-le de ta puissance, afin qu'il puisse, soutenu par la soumission et l'affection de ses frères, continuer à œuvrer pour le bien de l'ordre, ainsi que pour l'honneur et la gloire de ton Saint.
L'architecte de l'univers met des marbre de constance pour remplir cette obligation solennelle que je prends grand maître de la Grande Loge du Gabon.
Moi, Ali Bongo Ondimba, en présence du grand architecte de l'univers et de cette grande loge de maçons, je promets solennellement que je m'acquitterai des devoirs de grand maître de la Grande Loge du Gabon. Dans cette haute fonction, je ferai tout ce qui est en mon pouvoir pour servir les intérêts de la franc-maçonnerie régulière en général et de cette Grande Loge en particulier.
Le code Michel rappellera à tous, le sang nous rappellera que nous sommes tous jugés en haut. Moi Salomon, que
en présence du grand architecte de l'univers et de cette grande loge de maçons, je m'acquitterai des devoirs de grand maître de la Grande Loge du Congo. Je ferai tout ce qui est en mon pouvoir pour servir les intérêts de la franc-maçonnerie régulière en général.
The African Union's chair reaffirmed the institution's support to Cameroon in the preservation of peace, security and territorial integrity.
Sur les événements qui se sont déroulés, qui se déroulent dans les régions du nord-ouest et du sud-ouest du Cameroun, mais sont particulièrement instructifs. Je voudrais à cette occasion réitérer le ferme attachement de l'Union africaine à l'unité, l'intégrité territoriale, la stabilité politique et sociale.
What initially started as civil protests, largely peaceful, by lawyers, teachers, students in this multicultural country. The protests were about the perception of marginalization and discrimination by the authorities in Yaoundé. Unfortunately, these protests and demonstrations, which are protected rights under international law, they were met by very heavy-handed response by the Cameroonian authorities. This fueled the anger of local people in Cameroon's northwest and southwest regions. And soon, there began an agitation for the region's independence. I mean, this is a pattern that we have seen almost everywhere else. In our work in Africa, across the world, where we document over and over every time that government employs violence in response to civil action, it inevitably invites corresponding violence on the part of non-state actors. This is why we're here today.
Cameroonians who have been rendered homeless, they are in bushes, they are in forests, but still praising the name of the Lord. This is our Sunday service, Sunday worship.
I will tell them so because one make I made a belief that the fight will be fight, not the fight of justice. If the Republic they not find we will not go find them. If they not touch, we will not go touch them. But I tell the world today, the fight, we must take what it belongs to we, and me at the top. Me number not the top. I need to talk about Duam. La Republic, I need to see una. I need to see una. Una no day. Una big passo. I come and I cause trouble that. We did so. We know plenty, but dangerous. We also na the camp. Since the person I can afford to do na green camp. I don't know do na one camp. What na one camp kaki na innocent people there. But we, the way to na camp. When you go na can't kill different people, rape what picking them, rape what sister them. We wait to na camp. Anytime I be ready for camp, I'll give you a number. When I call me, so na the camp, we'll meet up. Face to face. I need to share una. I do have a General Lokobi. Umanfe. I tell you me come. And it come siam. You are run no man otei. I'm so to refine it. And so the day I'll get them from Aguku. And they say no man. La Republic at the station of our brother. Some of us school here, we to school for that side. Some of us are the army today. We are not sure what mammy they are for down here. Now one man, the make them, we are this fight fight one and not ever win. Start to small. We start fight with bush gun. The one that will take an una. I will take more than this. We will take us any day. We need to fear una. Una work on Amoka. One and not can fight we face to face. Una carry collapse the we. Una son of the government. What are the bomb has them? People the days bush die any day. They might tell una something. Whether whosoever, whether they internet government or republic government. Una the delay the fight. If we don't reach this level, we afford this for the road. If we say, which will we need them, we'll get them. Then now we'll pass Moyoka. If we don't block a corner, we'll block this side. They'll open a corner. For yeah, we'll be ready for anything when it comes. We'll be ready for anything. We need to fear. So anyhow, we thank you plenty. Mona just understand when I go just for a ready fight. We have support it for all in our heart. Some more rich boy are quit. For we will not program 1 month, but I know for next year. But the devil is a liar. Amen.
Amen. Amen. I wanted to ask you about a conflict that seems to have actually gotten worse in the last year, either despite or some say because of UN involvement, and it's the one in Cameroon between the central government and the Anglophone areas. Seems like they turned off the internet. Now, more recently, they've been burning down whole villages. I know that Mr. Fall had gone there, and at least I heard him say that anyone that wants secession is an extremist, which is something that the government uses to actually perform these acts and say that anyone that says that is a terrorist. So I wanted to know, how this is it's a lesser known or less high profile conflict, but how does DPA? You said you have all this expertise from around the world, but is it possible that sort of the former or even current colonial powers have kind of the ear in some cases of these kind of conflicts? And how would you assess the UN's performance in Cameroon?
Thank you, Mr. Lee. It's worth keeping in mind that that by and large, the Department of Political Affairs operates overseas under Chapter 6 of the Charter. That means member state consent. We operate in Chapter 8 in partnerships with regional and sub-regional organizations that are key to our ability to have full understanding and better credibility in our work. But it's Chapter 6. This is not something where the Department of Political Affairs can say, "Hey, we see a problem. We're going to send out a team or an envoy or something like that." That's not how it works. We have to have we have to be able to persuade a country that some outside engagement, some outside facilitation might be of use. And that's hard. This is one of the hardest things that I have seen about working in the Department of Political Affairs, and it's one of the hardest things about making prevention work. The Secretary General is, as you've all heard, is very keen on prevention across the whole spectrum of UN activities, whether it's prevention of childhood disease or prevention of conflict. But prevention of conflict is especially difficult. And I would put Cameroon in this category because we think that there are lessons learned, there are best practices, there are examples in other parts of the world where there have been successful processes that address the concerns of minorities, of various ethnic groups, of people who feel for one reason or the other disenfranchised that might be useful in Cameroon. But we're not going to be able to just march in there and say, this is what you got to do. That's not the idea, and it's not realistic. And so we have a sort of ongoing dialogue with the Cameroon authorities about our concerns over over problems in the Anglophone region and what could happen if those concerns aren't addressed effectively. But this is not the case of the UN being able to go in and saying this is the solution. Even when the door is open to UN intervention on conflict prevention under Chapter 6, I don't believe it's wise for the UN to say this is the solution. What the UN should be doing is helping local actors come up with a way forward that addresses grievances in a way that the local owners end up having ownership in that. I think the Cameroon is something we need to keep watching.
Good afternoon. The Trump administration is committed to protecting and promoting the God-given dignity and freedom of every human being. Every individual has rights that are inherent and inviolable. They're given by God and not by government. Because of that, no government must take them away. For decades, the United States has led global efforts to promote human rights, often through multilateral institutions. While we have seen improvements in certain human rights situations, for far too long we have waited while that progress comes too slowly, or in some cases, never comes. Too many commitments have gone unfulfilled. President Trump wants to move the ball forward. From day one, he has called out institutions or countries who say one thing and do another. And that's precisely the problem at the Human Rights Council. As President Trump said at the UN General Assembly, it is a massive source of embarrassment to the United Nations that some governments with egregious human rights records sit on the Human Rights Council. We have no doubt that there was once a noble vision for this council. But today we need to be honest. The Human Rights Council is a poor defender of human rights. Worse than that, the Human Rights Council has become an exercise in shameless hypocrisy, with many of the world's worst human rights abuses going ignored, and some of the world's most serious offenders sitting on the council itself. The only thing worse than a council that does almost nothing to protect human rights is a council that covers for human rights abuses and is therefore an obstacle to progress and an impediment to change. The Human Rights Council enables abuses by absolving wrongdoers through silence and falsely condemning those who have committed no offense. A mere look around the world today demonstrates that the Council has failed in its stated objectives. Its membership includes authoritarian governments with unambiguous and abhorrent human rights records, such as China, Cuba, and Venezuela. There is no fair or competitive election process, and countries have colluded with one another to undermine the current method of selecting members. And the Council's continued and well-documented bias against Israel is unconscionable. Since its creation, the Council has adopted more resolutions condemning Israel than against the rest of the world combined. The United States has no opposition in principle to multilateral bodies working to protect human rights. We desire to work with our allies and partners on this critical objective that reflects America's commitment to freedom. But when organizations undermine our national interests and our allies, we will not be complicit. When they seek to infringe on our national sovereignty, we will not be silent. The United States, which leads the world in humanitarian assistance, and whose service members have sacrificed life and limb to free millions from oppression and tyranny, will not take lectures from hypocritical bodies and institutions as America selflessly give their blood and treasure to help the defenseless. Ambassador Haley has spent more than a year trying to reform the Human Rights Council. She is the right leader to drive our efforts in this regard at the United Nations. Her efforts in this regard have been tireless. She has asserted American leadership on everything from the Assad regime's chemical weapons use to the pressure campaign against North Korea and the Iran-backed provocations in the Middle East. Ambassador Haley has been fearless and a consistent voice on behalf of our ally Israel, and she has a sincere passion to protect the security, dignity, and the freedom of human beings around the world, all while putting American interests first. She has been a fierce defender of human rights around the world. I will now turn it over to Ambassador Haley for her announcement on how the United States will move forward with respect to the UN Human Rights Council.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to thank Secretary Pompeo for his friendship and his partnership and his leadership as we move forward on these issues. 1 year ago, I traveled to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. On that occasion, I outlined the U.S. priorities for advancing human rights, and I declared our intent to remain a part of the Human Rights Council if essential reforms were achieved. These reforms were needed in order to make the Council a serious advocate for human rights. For too long, the Human Rights Council has been a protector of human rights abusers and a cesspool of political bias. Regrettably, it is now clear that our call for reform was not heeded. Human rights abusers continue to serve on and be elected to the Council. The world's most inhumane regimes continue to escape scrutiny. And the Council continues politicizing and scapegoating of countries with positive human rights records in an attempt to distract from the abusers in their ranks. Therefore, as we said we would do a year ago, If we did not see any progress, the United States is officially withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council. In doing so, I want to make it crystal clear that this step is not a retreat from human rights commitments. On the contrary, we take this step because our commitment does not allow us to remain a part of a hypocritical and self-serving organization that makes a mockery of human rights. We did not make this decision lightly. When this administration began 17 months ago, we were well aware of the enormous flaws in the Human Rights Council. We could have withdrawn immediately. We did not do that. Instead, we made a good faith effort to resolve the problems. We met with ambassadors of over a dozen countries in Geneva. Last September, in President Trump's speech before the UN General Assembly, he called for member states to support Human Rights Council reform. During High Level Week last year, we led a session on Human Rights Council reform co-hosted by the British and Dutch foreign ministers and more than 40 other countries. Our efforts continued all through this year in New York, where my team met with more than 125 member states and circulated draft texts. Almost every country we met with agrees with us, in principle and behind closed doors, that the Human Rights Council needs major, dramatic, systemic changes. Yet no other country has had the courage to join our fight. Meanwhile, the situation on the Council has gotten worse, not better. One of our central goals was to prevent the world's worst human rights abusers from gaining Human Rights Council membership. What happened? In the past year, the Democratic Republic of Congo was elected as a member. The DRC is widely known to have one of the worst human rights records in the world. Even as it was being elected to membership in the Human Rights Council, mass graves continued to be discovered in the Congo. Another of our goals was to stop the Council from protecting the world's worst human rights abusers. What happened? The Council would not even have a meeting on the human rights conditions in Venezuela. Why? Because Venezuela is a member of the Human Rights Council, as is Cuba, as is China. Similarly, the Council failed to respond in December and January when the Iranian regime killed and arrested hundreds of citizens simply for expressing their views. When a so-called Human Rights Council cannot bring itself to address the massive abuses in Venezuela and Iran, and it welcomes the Democratic Republic of Congo as a new member, the Council ceases to be worthy of its name. Such a council, in fact, damages the cause of human rights. And then, of course, there is the matter of the chronic bias against Israel. Last year, the United States made it clear that we would not accept the continued existence of Agenda Item 7, which singles out Israel in a way that no other country is singled out. Earlier this year, as it has in previous years, the Human Rights Council passed 5 resolutions against Israel, more than the number passed against North Korea, Iran, and Syria combined. This disproportionate focus and unending hostility towards Israel is clear proof that the Council is motivated by political bias, not by human rights. For all these reasons, the United States spent the past year engaged in a sincere effort to reform the Human Rights Council. It is worth examining why our efforts didn't succeed. At its core, there are 2 reasons. First, there are many unfree countries that simply do not want the Council to be effective. A credible Human Rights Council poses a real threat to them, so they oppose the steps that would create it. Look at the Council membership, and you see an appalling disrespect for the most basic human rights. These countries strongly resist any effort to expose their abusive practices. In fact, that's why many of them run for a seat on the Human Rights Council in the first place, to protect themselves from scrutiny. When we made it clear we would strongly pursue Council reform, these countries came out of the woodwork to oppose it. Russia, China, Cuba, and Egypt all attempted to undermine our reform efforts this past year. The second reason our reforms didn't succeed is in some ways even more frustrating. There are several countries on the Human Rights Council who do share our values. Many of them strongly urged us to remain engaged in the Council. They are embarrassed by the obsessive mistreatment of Israel. They share our alarm with the hypocrisy of countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Democratic Republic of Congo, and others serving on the Council. Ultimately, however, many of these like-minded countries were unwilling to seriously challenge the status quo. We gave them opportunity after opportunity and many months of consultations, and yet they would not take a stand unless it was behind closed doors. Some even admittedly were fine with the blatant flaws of the Council, as long as they could pursue their own narrow agenda within the current structure. We didn't agree with such a moral compromise when the previous UN Human Rights Commission was disbanded in 2006, and we don't agree with it now. Many of these countries argued that the United States should stay on the Human Rights Council because American participation is the last shred of credibility that the Council has. But that is precisely why we must leave. If the Human Rights Council is going to attack countries that uphold human rights and shield countries that abuse human rights, then America should not provide it with any credibility. Instead, we will continue to lead on human rights outside the misnamed Human Rights Council. Last year, during the United States presidency of the Security Council, we initiated the first ever Security Council session dedicated to the connection between human rights and peace and security. Despite protests and prohibitions, we did organize an event on Venezuela outside the Human Rights Council chambers in Geneva. And this past January, we did have a Security Council session on Iranian human rights in New York. I have traveled to UN refugee and internally displaced persons camps in Ethiopia, Congo, Turkey, and Jordan, and met with the victims of atrocities in those troubled regions. We have used America's voice and vote to defend human rights at the UN every day, and we will continue to do so. Even as we end our membership in the Human Rights Council, we will keep trying to strengthen the entire framework of the UN engagement on human rights issues, and we will continue to strongly advocate for reform of the Human Rights Council. Should it become reformed, we would be happy to rejoin it. America has a proud legacy as a champion of human rights, a proud legacy as the world's largest provider of humanitarian aid, and a proud legacy of liberating oppressed people and defeating tyranny throughout the world. While we do not seek to impose the American system on anyone else, we do support the rights of all people to have freedoms bestowed on them by their Creator. That is why we are withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council, an organization that is not worthy of its name. Thank you.